November 9th, 2024. Donald Trump wins the presidency again, and in that moment, without knowing it, he signed the death certificate of white supremacy. Not because he wanted to, not because he's righteous, but because God uses whoever he chooses to accomplish his purposes. Even Pharaoh, even Nebuchadnezzar, even the man who represents everything the system was built to protect. Watch what happens next. You're about to witness something most people will miss entirely. They'll see chaos, political theater, another election cycle, but you need to see the pattern underneath. The one that's been playing out since Deuteronomy 28 was written. Since the first auction block was built on American soil. Since the first lie was told about who you are. Because what's happening right now isn't random, it's prophetic math. And the numbers don't lie. Trump didn't wake up on November 9th planning to dismantle white supremacy. He woke up planning to restore what he calls greatness. But here's what they don't tell you. Every empire that builds itself on the blood of the innocent carries a timer. And that timer doesn't stop just because the oppressed stop counting. God keeps counting. Revelation 18 is explicit about this. Babylon falls not because she's weak, but because her sins have piled up to heaven. She gets paid back double for what she's done. The bills always come due. Let me show you something they buried. In 1619, the first enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia. 20 Africans stolen from Angola, sold as property. That's year zero for Black America's captivity on this soil. Now do the math. 1,619 plus 400 years equals 2019. Genesis 15 verse 13 records God telling Abraham, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land, not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. 4 centuries of captivity followed by deliverance." That prophecy wasn't just for ancient Israel, it's a pattern, a blueprint. And if 2019 marked 400 years, then everything happening from 2020 forward is the exit, the plague year, the uprising, the systems cracking, the unveiling. But here's where it gets dangerous. Trump's presidency, both terms, accelerates the collapse he thinks he's preventing. Every executive order meant to restore order actually exposes how fragile the whole structure is. Every nationalist policy meant to protect borders reveals how terrified the empire is of losing control. Every Supreme Court decision meant to roll back progress shows their hand. They know time is running out. They can feel the ground shifting. So they're grabbing everything they can before the house falls. This video is going to reveal 4 things that will fundamentally change how you see what's happening right now. Not theory, not speculation, documented evidence, biblical patterns, historical parallels you can verify yourself. First, I'm going to show you the prophetic math connecting 1,619, the 400-year prophecy, and why 2019 through 2025 is the Exodus timeline you're living through right now. Second, you're going to see how Trump's presidency functions exactly like Pharaoh hardening his heart in Exodus. How every move he makes to strengthen the system actually accelerates its collapse, and why the tighter they squeeze, the closer you are to the Red Sea moment. Third, we're going to examine the biblical empire cycles from Daniel chapter 2 and Revelation 18. And I'm going to show you how America has adopted Babylon's spirit, the obsession with wealth and comfort built on the backs of the exploited, the arrogance that says no one can touch us. And what happens when nations take on that spirit. Fourth, I'm going to give you the Exodus blueprint, what it actually means to leave Egypt in 2025, not just geographically, but spiritually, economically, psychologically, because some of you will get free from Egypt but still die in the wilderness. And I'm not going to let that be you. If you felt something shifting, you're not imagining it. It's prophetic timing. By the end of this video, you'll see Trump's presidency not as politics, but as a prophetic catalyst. You'll understand your role in what's coming next. and you'll have a choice to make that cannot be avoided. This isn't just information, this is transformation, this is preparation. And if you're watching this right now, it's because something in your spirit knows you need to hear it. Let's start with the math. 1619. The year that 20 Africans were brought to Virginia and sold as property. That's the beginning of Black America's captivity on this soil. Not visiting, not immigrating, captivity. Stolen from their homeland, stripped of their names, their language, their identity, their freedom. Genesis 15 verse 13. God tells Abraham, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. 400 years. Now, I want you to do the calculation with me. 1619 plus 400 égale 2019. 2019 marked the completion of the prophetic timer. And what happened in 2020? A plague year. COVID-19 shut down the entire world. And in the middle of that plague, on Memorial Day, May 25, 2020, George Floyd was murdered in broad daylight, 9 minutes and 29 seconds. A knee on his neck while he pleaded, "I can't breathe." The world was already locked down, forced to watch, couldn't look away, and the response was global. Protests in all 50 states, 60 countries worldwide. Statues of slave owners toppling from Bristol to Richmond. That wasn't random. That was the Exodus starting. The pattern isn't just for ancient Israel. It's a blueprint. God operates in patterns. And this pattern says 400 years of captivity, then deliverance. Not 399 years. Not 401 years. 400. Let that sink in. You're not living in random times. You're living in prophetic times. Everything happening from 2020 forward is the exit phase. The system's cracking, the masks coming off, the unveiling. And Trump? He's not the cause of white supremacy's collapse. He's the symptom of its desperation. Think about Pharaoh in Exodus. When Moses first showed up demanding freedom, Pharaoh didn't just say no. He made the oppression worse. Exodus chapter 5. He took away the straw but demanded the same number of bricks. He tightened his grip because he sensed what was coming. That's what you're watching now. The tighter they squeeze, the closer you are to the Red Sea moment. Trump's presidency is Pharaoh tightening his grip. Every executive order meant to restore order exposes how fragile the structure is. Every nationalist policy reveals how terrified the empire is of losing control. Every Supreme Court decision rolling back progress shows their hand. They know time is running out, they can feel it. So they're grabbing everything they can before the house collapses. When Pharaoh chased the Israelites to the water's edge, he thought he had them trapped. He didn't realize he was chasing his own army into a grave. Trump isn't the cause. He's the last loudest defender of a dying system. The man who says the quiet parts out loud, who removes the mask, who shows you exactly what this nation was built on and who it was built for. And in showing you that so clearly, so undeniably, he makes it impossible to pretend anymore. The mythology dies when the reality is too blatant to ignore. Let that sink in. No, really. They needed you to believe in the mythology. That America was founded on noble principles that just needed perfecting, that the Constitution was colorblind, that slavery was an unfortunate blemish on an otherwise beautiful experiment. They needed you to believe the system could be reformed if you just worked hard enough, voted responsibly enough, protested peacefully enough. But Trump's presidency shattered that story. He governed like the founders actually wrote it. For propertied white men, by propertied white men, protecting the interests of propertied white men. He revealed the original operating system. And you can't unsee that. Now reverse that. What they meant for harm, God uses for revelation. Romans 8 verse 28 isn't about making bad things feel good. It's about God weaponizing the enemy's own moves. Joseph told his brothers in Genesis 50 verse 20, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Trump meant to make America great again for the people who already had it great. But in doing so, he triggered a mass awakening in the people who never had it great at all. Black voters in 2020 turned out in record numbers, not because they loved Biden. They turned out because they'd seen enough. The veil was torn. And once you see the machinery behind the curtain, you can't go back to sleep. Here's what you need to understand about empire cycles. Daniel chapter 2 shows us the statue: gold, silver, bronze, iron mixed with clay. Each metal represents a kingdom, each one weaker than the last. We're in the feat stage now. Iron mixed with clay, strong and brittle at the same time, holding together by force but cracking under its own weight. Trump's second term is the iron trying to hold the clay in place. It won't work. It can't work. The stone cut without hands is already rolling downhill. And that stone is the kingdom of God. Multi-ethnic, multi-tongued, ungovernable by Rome's children. You don't stop that stone. You get out of its way or get crushed. But let's not spiritualize this into passivity. The stone rolls, yes, but you still have to march toward the Red Sea. You still have to pack your bags in Egypt, even when Pharaoh hasn't said yes yet. Faith without works is dead. So what does preparation look like when an empire is collapsing and a remnant is being called out? First, you have to understand that white supremacy isn't just racism. It's a religious system. It has priests, the politicians who baptize injustice into law. It has doctrines. Manifest destiny, the curse of Ham. Colorblindness. It has liturgy, the Pledge of Allegiance, the national anthem, the bootstrap mythology. It has sacraments, property ownership, credit scores, zip codes, and it has a god, white skin as the image of deity, whiteness as the mediator between humanity and power. This isn't hyperbole, this is how it functions, and Trump is its most honest high priest in a generation. He doesn't perform the rituals with guilt or apology, he conducts them with pride. That's why his base loves him, not despite the cruelty. Because of it, he gives them permission to worship openly again, to say the words their grandparents said without shame, to believe what the founders believed without the burden of pretending they've evolved. He tells them they're losing their country, and he's right. They are. Not because of immigration or cultural Marxism or whatever the talking points are this week. They're losing it because the lease is up, the land cries out, the blood of Abel still speaks, and God is not mocked. Whatever a nation sows, that it will also reap. Galatians 6 verse 7. Don't be deceived. You don't plant slavery, Jim Crow, redlined, mass incarceration, medical experimentation, economic extraction, and cultural theft for 4 centuries, and then just walk into the sunset whistling. The harvest comes. It always comes. Trump's presidency is part of that harvest, not the judgment itself, the exposure before the judgment, the warning shot, the chance to repent while the door is still open. But if you read Revelation 18 carefully, you'll notice Babylon doesn't repent. She doubles down. She says in her heart, I sit as queen, I am not a widow, I will never mourn. And then in one day, her plagues come. Death, mourning, famine, consumed by fire. I'm not saying America is Babylon, I'm saying America has Babylon's spirit. The obsession with wealth and comfort built on the backs of the exploited. The arrogance that says no one can touch us. The delusion that military might equals divine approval. And when nations take on that spirit, they inherit that judgment. So what does Trump trigger? He triggers the unmasking. The system stops pretending to be neutral. The mythology stops pretending to include you. The institutions stop pretending they were ever designed for your flourishing. And in that unmasking, a choice becomes unavoidable. Do you keep trying to integrate into a structure that's collapsing, or do you build something new while there's still time? Let me take you back to 1877. Reconstruction is over. Federal troops pull out of the South. The Compromise of 1877 is signed. A backroom deal that trades black freedom for political power. Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president, and black folks are thrown back to the wolves. Everything that had been gained in 12 years, schools, land ownership, political representation, gets systematically dismantled. And it wasn't because black people failed. It was because the system never intended for Reconstruction to succeed. It was a placeholder, a pause, a way to look merciful without actually redistributing power. You see the pattern? Every time there's a breakthrough for black folks, there's a backlash. Every time there's a moment of progress, there's a pendulum swing. The Emancipation Proclamation leads to black codes. The Civil Rights Act leads to the war on drugs. The first black president leads to Trump. This isn't coincidence. This is strategy. The system gives just enough to create hope, then snatches it back to create despair. Because hopeful people organize, despairing people consume. And the empire needs you consuming, not organizing. But here's what they didn't plan for. Every betrayal is also a tutorial. Every backlash teaches you something new about how the machinery works. Reconstruction taught black folks that federal protection is temporary. That white moderates will choose peace over justice every single time. That you can't depend on the government to guarantee what God has already promised. Those lessons got passed down, whispered at kitchen tables, encoded in blues songs and Negro spirituals, and those lessons are activating now in real time as people watch the same patterns repeat. Trump's 2024 victory is Reconstruction's betrayal in HD. It's the system saying once again, we never meant it. You thought the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. We'll show you how fast it snaps back. You thought electing a black president meant progress. We'll elect the antithesis twice just to prove the point. You thought your votes mattered. We'll show you the Electoral College, gerrymandering, voter suppression, and Supreme Court decisions that say otherwise. The mask is off. The deal is clear. This nation was never meant for you, and it's tired of pretending. And that clarity, as brutal as it is also liberating. Because now you know you're not crazy. You're not imagining it. You're not being too sensitive or reading into things. The data is in. The verdict is clear. And once you accept that, you can stop begging for a seat at a table that was built on your ancestors' backs. You can stop trying to integrate into systems designed for your extraction. You can stop performing respectability for people who will never respect you. You can finally do what Exodus 12 instructs. Pack your bags, eat standing up, and prepare to leave. Now some of you are thinking, leave and go where? Good question, necessary question. But it's the wrong question first. The first question is, leave what? Leave the mythology. Leave the lie that you're 3/5 human. Leave the shame they taught you about your hair, your skin, your history, your bodies. Leave the doctrine that suffering is noble and patience is virtue when you're being crushed. Leave the celebrity pastors who preach prosperity while their people drown. Leave the political parties that show up every 4 years and disappear for the next 1,459 days. Leave the schools that teach your children to hate themselves. Leave the media that shapes your imagination to see yourself as sidekick, victim, or clown. Leave the debt cycles that keep you running on a hamster wheel. Leave every system that extracts your labor, your creativity, your trauma, your literal DNA, and gives you nothing sustainable in return. That's the exodus. Not necessarily a geographic one, though for some it will be. But definitely a spiritual, economic, and psychological one. An exodus from Egypt's logic. From Pharaoh's definition of productivity and success. From the taskmasters who convinced you that freedom is irresponsible and success is maturity. This is where the Bible becomes a tactical manual. You think Moses woke up one day and Pharaoh said, "You know what, y'all are free?" No. God sent 10 plagues. 10 escalating disasters that proved Egypt's gods were powerless. The Nile turned to blood. Their water god defeated, frogs, lice, flies. Their land polluted, livestock die, their wealth evaporates, boils, their bodies betray them, hail, locusts, darkness. their sky god silent, and then the final one, the death of the firstborn, the thing they valued most, the future they were building. Taken in one night. You're watching the plagues now. The 2008 financial collapse, Hurricane Katrina, COVID-19, the George Floyd uprisings, the January 6th insurrection, the supply chain breakdowns, the inflation, the mass shootings, the mental health crisis, the infertility rates dropping, the trust in institutions evaporating. These aren't random. These are the birth pangs. The system is convulsing. And every convulsion is God saying the same thing he said to Pharaoh. Let my people go. But Pharaoh's heart was hard. Exodus says God hardened it. Not because God is capricious, but because Pharaoh had already chosen. He'd chosen empire over ethics, chosen wealth over worship, chosen his own glory over God's glory. And when you make that choice long enough, your heart becomes concrete. You can't bend even when you see the writing on the wall. That's where America is. The magicians, the economists, the strategists, the pollsters are saying the models don't work anymore. But the pharaohs keep building, and Trump, whether he knows it or not, is hardening the heart one more time, making the oppression so loud, so visible, so undeniable that the masses have no choice but to respond. You couldn't ignore George Floyd's murder. You couldn't ignore the pandemic exposing who was essential and who was expendable. You couldn't ignore the police budgets versus the school budgets. You couldn't ignore the statues of slaveholders still standing in town squares. Trump made it all loud again, pulled the scab off, and now the wound is exposed, infected, requiring treatment or amputation. Pay attention to this. In Exodus, after the 10th plague, Pharaoh finally says, "Go." But then he changes his mind. He musters his army and chases them to the Red Sea. Why? Because he can't imagine an economy without slave labor. He can't imagine a nation where black bodies aren't the foundation. So he chases them, even though God has already judged Egypt, even though his own son is dead, even though the wealth is gone. He chases them because that's all he knows. Control or collapse. That's what you're about to see in this next season. The system will chase you even as it drowns itself. It will pass laws to control your wombs, your bathrooms, your ballots, your books. It will criminalize your existence in every way it can because it cannot imagine itself without you underneath it. The architecture collapses without the foundation. And you've been the foundation since 1619. But here's the promise, and you need to hold on to this. The Red Sea splits not because you're perfect, not because you've earned it, but because God is faithful to his word. He said 400 years. He said there would be deliverance. He said the oppressor would drown in the same waters meant to trap you. And he keeps his promises. Even when it looks impossible. Even when the army is behind you and the water is in front of you. Even when your own people are complaining that Egypt was better because at least they had food. The sea splits and you walk through on dry ground. Now let's talk about what happens after the sea, because this is where most people stop reading, and it's the part you need most. The Israelites didn't go straight to the promised land. They wandered for 40 years. Why? Numbers 14 tells us. Because they didn't trust God enough to take the land. They sent spies into Canaan. The spies came back and said, yes, it's everything God promised, milk and honey, abundant resources. But there are giants, fortified cities. We looked like grasshoppers to them, and the people believed the giants were bigger than God. So God said, fine, this generation won't enter. Your children will. But you'll wander until everyone who chose fear over faith dies in the wilderness. That's the part nobody preaches. The part where freedom is offered and refused. Where the promised land is right there, and you camp outside it for 40 years because you're more comfortable complaining in the desert than confronting the giants. Don't let that be you. Don't let this generation be the one that gets free from Egypt but dies before possessing what God said is yours. Trump's second term is the Red Sea moment. The system is about to chase itself into drowning, but after that there's a wilderness. a period of testing, a time when manna falls daily but you have to trust God for tomorrow's provision because you can't hoard it. A time when the old leadership, the Moses generation, has to train the Joshua generation to fight differently, not with pitchforks against muskets, not with protests against tanks, but with strategy, with economic sovereignty, with educational autonomy, with spiritual warfare that understands we're not fighting flesh and blood, but principalities and powers and rulers of darkness in high places. You want to know what Trump triggered? He triggered the choice, the unavoidable, inescapable choice between Egypt and the Promised Land, between integration into a dying empire and building a new order altogether, between begging Pharaoh for better bricks and leaving to build your own cities. And the tragedy is some of you will choose Egypt. You'll see the collapse coming and still try to get a better position on the Titanic. You'll see the writing on the wall and still invest in the empire's currency. You'll see the evidence and still send your children to schools that teach them to despise themselves. But some of you won't. Some of you will hear this and something will click, a knowing that's deeper than intellect, a recognition that's ancestral. You'll feel your grandmother's prayers activating. You'll remember the dreams you had as a child before the system taught you they were impossible. You'll look at your children and decide they will not inherit your chains. And you'll start moving. Not recklessly, not without wisdom, but with the kind of holy urgency that knows the hour is late and the door is closing. Let me tell you about a woman named Harriet Tubman, born Araminta Ross, enslaved, beaten so badly she had seizures for the rest of her life. But in 1849 she walked away, didn't ask permission, didn't wait for the legal system to free her. She walked, followed the North Star, trusted the conductors on the Underground Railroad. And when she got to freedom, she didn't stop. She went back 19 times, freed over 300 people. And she said this: I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. That's the real battle. Not convincing white supremacy to end. It won't until God ends it. The real battle is convincing black folks they're still enslaved, that the chains look different, but they're still chains. That freedom isn't a paycheck and a mortgage in a red-line suburb. That liberation isn't a VP title at a corporation that funds private prisons. That progress isn't your daughter getting into an Ivy League school that was built with slave labor and still invests in defense contractors bombing black and brown countries overseas. Trump triggered the awakening. The moment when enough of us looked around and said, wait, this isn't freedom, this is Egypt with air conditioning, Pharaoh with a 401k taskmasters with business casual dress codes. The bricks are still being made, the quotas are still due, the bodies are still breaking. We've just been taught to call it opportunity. Now we're going to go deeper into the historical timeline, because you need to understand how we got here. Not 50 years ago. Not 100 years ago. From the very beginning. 1619. That's the foundation year. 20 Africans arrive in Virginia and are sold as property. But this wasn't random. This was the beginning of a system that would define America for the next 400 years. The economic model of the entire nation was built on free labor. Cotton, tobacco, rice, sugar. The industries that made America wealthy were all powered by enslaved black bodies. And the Constitution, the document they tell you is sacred, codified it. Article 1, Section 2. Black people counted as 3/5 of a person for representation purposes, but had zero rights. That's not a blemish. That's the blueprint. By 1860, the combined value of enslaved people in America was more than all the railroads, factories, and banks combined. Slavery wasn't a side economy, it was the economy. Then came 1865. The Civil War ends. The 13th Amendment is passed, and everyone celebrates the end of slavery. Except, read the text, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime. That exception clause, that's the loophole. They didn't abolish slavery. They outsourced it to the criminal justice system. Immediately after the war, Southern states passed black codes, laws that criminalized unemployment, gathering in groups, owning firearms, even walking on the wrong side of the road if you were black. The whole purpose was to arrest black people and put them back into forced labor through the convict leasing system. Break the law, get convicted, get enslaved again. Except now, it was legal under the Constitution. By 1898, 73% of Alabama's state revenue came from convict leasing. They were leasing prisoners, mostly black, to plantations, coal mines, railroads, exactly where they had worked as slaves. This wasn't just in Alabama. This was across the South, and it lasted into the 1940 seconds. Let that sink in. Legal slavery under a different name continued for 80 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Then we moved to Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. For 12 years, black people in the South made incredible gains. They started schools, they bought land, they were elected to office. Mississippi sent 2 black senators to Washington. South Carolina's legislature was majority black. And then came the Compromise of 1877. The deal that ended Reconstruction. Federal troops pulled out of the South, and black people were abandoned. Everything they built was systematically destroyed. Schools burned, land stolen, elected officials terrorized and murdered. The rise of the KKK, which operated with the full knowledge and often participation of local law enforcement. This wasn't just random violence. This was organized terrorism designed to re-establish white supremacy after it had been legally defeated. From 1877 to 1965, Jim Crow laws enforced total racial segregation. Separate schools, separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, separate everything. And it wasn't equal. Black schools got a fraction of the funding. Black neighborhoods got no infrastructure. During this same period, lynching became a tool of control. Thousands of black men, women and children were murdered by mobs, often for accusations that were completely fabricated. And photographs of these lynchings were turned into postcards that white families mailed to each other. Let me say that again. They made postcards out of lynching photos. This isn't ancient history. Your grandparents lived through this, and nobody was held accountable. Not the mobs, not the law enforcement that stood by, not the politicians who encouraged it. Then we get to the New Deal in the 1930 seconds. President Franklin Roosevelt's programs to help Americans recover from the Great Depression. Except black people were explicitly excluded from most of the benefits. The Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, refused to insure mortgages in black neighborhoods. They literally drew red lines on maps around black communities and said these areas are too risky to invest in. That's where the term redlining comes from. Meanwhile, white families were getting government-backed mortgages to buy homes in the suburbs. Those homes appreciated in value. They became generational wealth. White families passed down equity to their children and grandchildren. Black families were locked out. By 1960, less than 2% of the $120 billion in FHA-backed mortgages had gone to non-white families. That created the wealth gap that still exists today. White families have on average 10 times the wealth of black families, not because they worked harder, because the government gave them access to wealth-building tools and denied those same tools to black people. The GI Bill after World War II did the same thing. Veterans were supposed to get help with education, home loans, business loans, but black veterans were systematically denied those benefits. Banks wouldn't give them loans. Colleges wouldn't admit them. The system said, "Thank you for your service. Now, get back in your place." Then came the Civil Rights Movement. 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, says separate but equal is unconstitutional. 1964, the Civil Rights Act is passed. 1965, the Voting Rights Act. Finally, legal equality. Except here comes the backlash. 1971, President Richard Nixon declares the war on drugs. And decades later, his domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, admitted in an interview exactly what it was for. He said, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. They admitted it. It was a strategy to re-incarcerate black people. The result? The prison population exploded. In 1970, there were about 300,000 people in prison in America. By 2000, there were 3 million, the majority black and brown, for non-violent drug offenses that white people commit at the same rates but are not arrested for. And because of the 13th Amendment exception clause, those prisoners can be forced to work for pennies, 12 cents an hour in some states, making products for corporations. Legal slavery continuing to this day. The crack versus cocaine sentencing disparity made it even worse. Crack, which was more common in black communities, carried a sentence 100 times harsher than powder cocaine, which was more common in white communities. Same drug, different form. Wildly different punishment. This wasn't an accident. This was policy, designed to fill prisons, designed to disenfranchise black voters because felons lose the right to vote, designed to break up families because when you incarcerate a generation of men, their children grow up without fathers. Trump's role in this? In 2017, his Attorney General Jeff Sessions reversed an Obama-era policy that was phasing out private prisons. Private prisons are corporations that profit from incarceration. The more people in prison, the more money they make. And they lobby for harsher sentencing laws to keep their facilities full. They have occupancy quotas, contracts with states that guarantee a certain number of prisoners. If the state doesn't provide enough prisoners, they have to pay a penalty. Think about that. The system is financially incentivized to keep people locked up, and those prisoners work 12 cents an hour in some states, making products for major corporations. Products that get sold at full price, while the people making them earn less than $1 a day. Who's getting rich? Not the prisoners, not their families, the corporations and the shareholders. Trump also repeatedly called for law and order policies, harsher sentences, and he pardoned corrupt politicians and war criminals, but not a single person serving time for non-violent drug offenses. He showed you exactly whose side the system is on. Now let's talk about 2008. The financial collapse. Banks had been giving subprime mortgages, predatory loans with terrible terms, specifically targeting black and Latino homeowners. When the housing market crashed, those families lost everything. Black wealth was destroyed at twice the rate of white wealth. The banks got bailed out, the families didn't, and then came 2008, the election of Barack Obama, the first black president, and the immediate backlash. The Tea Party movement. The birther conspiracy that Trump himself promoted, demanding Obama's birth certificate, claiming he wasn't really American. For 8 years, the system tolerated a black man in the White House. And then in 2016, it elected the total opposite. A man who bragged about sexual assault, who mocked disabled people, who called Mexican immigrants rapists, who said there were very fine people on both sides when white supremacists marched in Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us." 81% of white evangelicals voted for him. The same people who claimed to follow Jesus chose a man who embodies the opposite of everything Jesus taught. That's not politics, that's apostasy. And then 2020. COVID-19 hits, the plague year, and it exposed everything. Who was essential? and who was expendable. Black and brown people dying at twice the rate because they were the ones who couldn't work from home. The ones without health insurance. The ones in overcrowded housing. And then May 25th, 2020, Memorial Day. George Floyd is murdered. 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Derek Chauvin kneels on his neck while he begs for his life, while bystanders plead with the officer to stop. In broad daylight. On camera. The world had to watch. Because everyone was locked down. You couldn't look away. And the response was unprecedented. Protests in all 50 states, over 60 countries, millions of people in the streets, statues of slaveholders and colonizers toppling, Confederate monuments removed. The conversation shifted. Trump's response? He threatened to deploy the military against protesters. He had peaceful demonstrators tear-gassed so he could walk to a church and hold up a Bible for a photo op. He called Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate while calling armed white militias patriots. He revealed exactly what the system thinks of you. And then January 6th, 2021, a mob of mostly white Trump supporters stormed the Capitol to overturn an election. They built a gallows. They chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." They smeared feces on the walls. They beat police officers with American flags, and Trump called them patriots, said he loved them, told them they were special. If that had been black people, they would have been shot on sight. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it. The double standard is the point. The cruelty is the point. The message is the point. This country was built for us, not you. 2024. Trump wins again, and people are shocked. But you shouldn't be. This is the pattern. This is Reconstruction's betrayal happening again. This is the system saying, "We gave you Obama, now we're taking it back with interest." Every Supreme Court decision rolling back affirmative action. Every state banning books about racism. Every corporation eliminating DEI programs. Every law restricting voting access. This is the backlash. But here's what they don't understand. Every time they do this, they're fulfilling prophecy. Every time they tighten the grip, they're hardening Pharaoh's heart. Every time they chase you toward the water, they're sealing their own fate. Because the Red Sea is coming. And when it splits, you're going to walk through. And when they chase you, the waters will close over them. This isn't wishful thinking. This is the pattern. This is biblical history repeating. And you need to be ready. So who benefits from all of this? Follow the money, follow the power, follow the resources. The Vatican blessed the slave trade with papal bulls in 1452 and 1455. Pope Nicholas V literally gave Portugal permission to enslave all Saracens and pagans and enemies of Christ, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. The church got wealthy from it. Northern banks financed the slave trade and got wealthy from it. Southern plantation owners built generational wealth from it. And that wealth is still in those families today. It didn't disappear. It compounded. Today, who benefits from mass incarceration? Private prison corporations like CoreCivic and Geo Group. They're publicly traded companies. You can buy their stock. They lobby Congress for harsher sentencing laws because they need bodies to fill beds to make profit. They have occupancy quotas, contracts with states that guarantee a certain number of prisoners. If the state doesn't provide enough prisoners, they have to pay a penalty. Think about that. The system is financially incentivized to keep people locked up. And those prisoners work 12 cents an hour in some states, making products for major corporations, products that get sold at full price, while the people making them earn less than $1 a day. Who's getting rich? Not the prisoners, not their families, the corporations and the shareholders. Who benefited when the FHA denied mortgages to black families but gave them to white families? The white families who built equity, who passed down wealth, who sent their kids to college debt-free, who started businesses with inherited money, who bought more property that appreciated in value. Meanwhile, black families were locked into renting, paying landlords, building someone else's wealth, starting from zero every generation because there was nothing to inherit. The wealth gap today, white families having 10 times the wealth of black families, that's not because of work ethic, that's because of policy. Deliberate, documented policy that gave advantages to one group and denied them to another. Who benefited when black codes criminalized survival after the Civil War? The same plantation owners who needed labor. They got their workers back through convict leasing, didn't have to pay them, just had to rent them from the state. Who benefits when curriculum is sanitized and history is whitewashed? The people who don't want their children to know what their ancestors did. The people who want to maintain the mythology that America is innocent, that the system is fair, that if you're not succeeding, it's your fault, not the system's design. Ask yourself, who benefits when you don't know your history? Who benefits when you're ashamed of who you are? Who benefits when you're trying to integrate into a system designed for your exploitation instead of building your own systems? The consequences of this extend into every area of life. Your grandparents couldn't buy a house because of redlining, so they couldn't build equity, so they had nothing to pass down to your parents. So your parents started from zero. So you start from zero. Meanwhile, your white peers inherited houses, stocks, business connections. That's not ancient history affecting you. That's a direct line from policy to your bank account today. Schools are funded by property taxes. If your grandparents were forced into low-value neighborhoods because they couldn't get mortgages anywhere else, those neighborhoods have low property values. Low property values mean low tax revenue. Low tax revenue means underfunded schools. Underfunded schools mean worse education. Worse education means fewer opportunities. It's a cycle. And it was designed. It wasn't an accident. It was policy. Health disparities. Black Americans have lower life expectancy than white Americans. That gap is the widest it's been in decades. COVID killed Black Americans at twice the rate. Not because of genetics, because of access, because of stress, because of the chronic trauma of living in a system designed for your failure. Economic vulnerability. Black-owned businesses failed at twice the rate during COVID. And Trump's policies, the tax cuts, the deregulation, all of it favored the wealthy. The people who already had capital, not the people trying to build. Political disenfranchisement. When you incarcerate a generation of men for non-violent drug offenses, they lose the right to vote. Millions of black men can't vote because of felony convictions for crimes that shouldn't have been felonies in the first place. Add gerrymandering, voter ID laws that target communities without easy access to DMVs, polling place closures in black neighborhoods, and you have systematic disenfranchisement. And then there's the psychological warfare. The system convincing you that you're only valuable by its metrics, the degree, the job title, the house in the right zip code, the car, the credit score. All of it designed to keep you chasing validation from a system that will never validate you. Because if you're chasing their approval, you're not building your own alternatives. The bootstrap lie is the cruelest one. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, except they never gave you boots. And while you're trying to figure out how to pull yourself up with no boots, their children are inheriting entire shoe stores. Trump's 2017 tax cuts gave the biggest breaks to the wealthiest Americans. Capped deductions that hurt the middle class, and working people saw their taxes go up while billionaires paid less. His administration reversed the Obama-era phase out of private prisons. The system needs those bodies, needs those workers, needs that free labor. Supreme Court decisions under his appointees gutted affirmative action, gutted voting rights protections, showed exactly whose interests they serve. The curriculum wars, banning critical race theory, which isn't even taught in K through 12 schools, banning books about racism, about LGBTQ people, about anything that challenges the mythology. They attacked the 1619 project. Most of the politicians condemning it never even read it. They just know it threatens the narrative. So they try to make it illegal to teach. Economic indicators are flashing red. Inflation, labor shortages, supply chain collapse, mental health crisis, drug epidemics, every metric showing a system in decay. And every metric of racial justice is moving backward. DEI departments gutted, voting rights rolled back, police budgets increasing, while social services get cut. And then they gaslight you. They call the retreat from justice progress toward fairness. They call the restoration of white supremacy the end of identity politics. They call truth divisive and lies unity. Isaiah 5 verse 20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. The woes are piling up, the judgment is coming, and you need to know which side you're on. But I didn't bring you this far to leave you in anger. I brought you here to empower you, to remind you who you are, to give you the blueprint for what comes next. This is your heritage. You are not slaves. You are not descendants of slaves. You are children of the Most High, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. 1 Peter 2 verse 9. Your history didn't start in 1619. Your ancestors built the pyramids, the kingdom of Kush, the Mali Empire. Timbuktu was a center of learning when Europe was in the Dark Ages. Your ancestors were mathematicians, astronomers, architects, metallurgists, linguists, kings and queens, before they were ever captives. They survived the Middle Passage, the auction block, the plantation, Jim Crow, and they passed down resilience in your DNA. You come from survivors, from people who sang in the darkness, who built schools with no resources, who loved fiercely in the face of hatred, who kept faith when there was no evidence. That's who you are, not what the system says you are, not what the statistics say, not what the neighborhoods or the schools or the prisons say. You are made in the image of God, and nobody can take that from you. The mythology dies when you know the truth. Once you see how the machinery works, you can't unsee it. Once the veil is torn, you can't put it back, and that's liberating. Because now you know, you're not crazy, you're not imagining it. The system really is rigged. The game really is fixed. And you can stop blaming yourself for not winning a game designed for your loss. Now comes the exodus. Not necessarily geographic, though for some it will be, but definitely spiritual, economic, psychological. Leave the mythology, the lie that you're 3/5 human, the shame about your hair, your skin, your history. Leave the doctrine that suffering is noble when you're being crushed. Leave the celebrity pastors preaching prosperity while the people starve. Leave the political parties that show up every 4 years then disappear. Leave the schools teaching your children to hate themselves. Leave the media telling you you're only valuable as a sidekick, a victim or entertainment. Leave the debt cycles, the systems extracting your labor, your creativity, your trauma, your DNA, and giving nothing back. Harriet Tubman said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves." That's the real battle, not convincing the system to change. It won't until God changes it. The real battle is convincing people they're still enslaved, that the chains look different, but they're still chains. Freedom isn't a paycheck in a system designed to extract from you. Liberation isn't a title at a corporation funding the prison industrial complex. Progress isn't getting your child into a school built on slave labor that still invests in bombing black and brown people overseas. Trump triggered the awakening. The moment enough people looked around and said, "This isn't freedom. This is Egypt with air conditioning, Pharaoh with benefits, taskmasters with HR departments. The bricks are still being made, the quotas are still due, the bodies are still breaking. We've just been taught to call it opportunity. So what do you do? How do you prepare when an empire is collapsing and a remnant is being called out? First, pray, not passive prayers. Daniel 9 prayers. The ones where you repent on behalf of the nation, where you remind God of his promises, where you intercede with fasting. The 3 a.m. prayers, when the veil is thin. The prayers that break generational curses, that cancel ungodly agreements, that loose what heaven has loosed and bind what heaven has bound. Pray like your life depends on it, because it does. Second, study. You can't fight what you don't understand. Read Deuteronomy 28 inches Hebrew. See how the curses match the Black American experience with precision. Read the slave trade records, the bills of sale, the insurance policies on human cargo. Read about the Tulsa massacre, the Tuskegee experiment, COINTELPRO files on black leaders. Read the Supreme Court decisions. Know your enemy's own words. Third, build parallel economies, black banks, credit unions, land trusts, homeschool co-ops teaching true history, food cooperatives, barter networks, skill-sharing systems. Create infrastructure that doesn't depend on the empire's permission. Because when the empire falls, and it will fall, you need something in place to sustain your people through the transition. $1 in the black community circulates for 6 hours before leaving. In the Asian community, it circulates for 28 days. That's economic sovereignty. That's what you're building. Fourth, mentor the next generation. Teach your children who they really are, not slaves, children of God, royal priesthood. Teach them their history before 1619. Teach them about Kush, Mali, Timbuktu. Teach them their ancestors were kings before they were captives. Give them an identity rooted in glory, not trauma, so they grow up proud, not ashamed, strong, not broken. Fifth, unify. The enemy's greatest weapon is division. Light skin versus dark skin. African versus Caribbean versus American. Denominational splits. Class warfare. All designed to keep you fragmented. Ezekiel 37 shows 2 sticks becoming one in God's hand. Unity isn't uniformity, it's aligned purpose. Saying we might disagree on tactics, but we agree on the mission. Liberation. Restoration. The resurrection of a people prophesied dead, but refusing to stay buried. Sixth, step into the water. Joshua 3. The priests had to step into the flooding Jordan River before it parted. They had to take the first step in faith. The waters didn't part until their feet touched. You're waiting for perfect conditions. They're not coming. You're waiting for the path to be clear. It won't be clear until you step. Faith requires action, movement, risk, the willingness to look foolish, to be called crazy, to walk toward the water when everyone says you're going to drown. This is the Exodus generation. You're living in the prophetic window. 1,619 plus 400 years. The timer finished. Everything from 2020 forward is the exit phase. The plagues are falling on Egypt. The systems are convulsing. The empire is chasing itself into the sea, and you need to be ready to walk through when the waters split. But I need something from you right now. If you've made it this far, if this message is resonating in your spirit, I need you to comment the word Exodus below. Let me know you're seeing the pattern. Let me know you're waking up. And tell me where you're watching from. Because you're not alone in this. Look at the comments. We're waking up together. This is a movement, a remnant, a people hearing the call and responding. If this video is speaking to you, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. You might be their Moses moment. You might be the voice that finally breaks through the fog. Don't keep this to yourself. And if you need to go back and re-watch the section about the prophetic math, the 1,619 plus 400 years calculation, do it. Let it sink in, because that's the foundation. That's the proof this isn't random. You're being equipped right now. This isn't just information. This is preparation. This is tactical. This is spiritual warfare training. But here's the part that's going to challenge you most. Not everyone who leaves Egypt makes it to the promised land. Some die in the wilderness, some turn back, some get to the edge and refuse to cross because they see the giants and forget God is bigger. Don't be that generation. Don't let fear stop you when you're this close. Stay with me. We're not done yet. The fall of white supremacy isn't the fall of white people. Revelation 7 shows a multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language standing before the throne. The kingdom of God is multi-ethnic. The New Jerusalem has 12 gates. There's room for everybody who repents and submits to the king. But what dies is the system. The ideology that made melanin a curse. The structure that distributed resources and dignity based on proximity to European features. That system is terminal. It has cancer in every organ, and Trump is the fever spike right before the crisis. The body's last attempt to fight the infection before it either heals or dies. When that system dies, it's taking everyone attached to it down with it. That's Revelation 18. Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. The call isn't to reform Babylon, it's to evacuate Babylon, to detach from her economy, her values, her definition of success, because her judgment is coming. And if you're still attached when she falls, you fall with her. This is why the gospel is urgent right now. Not the prosperity gospel that baptizes greed, not the social gospel that makes activism a substitute for salvation, but the biblical gospel that says the kingdom of God is at hand, that Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, some in worship, some in terror. There's a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and you need to be transferred into it before the shakeable kingdoms collapse. Trump's presidency is shaking everything, and what remains after the shaking is what's unshakable. So the question is, what have you built your life on? The empire's promises, or God's? The system's approval, or the creator's purpose? A retirement account that evaporates when the dollar collapses, or treasures stored in heaven? A zip code that determines your worth, or an identity rooted in being made in the image of God? You have to choose, and the hour is late. If you're still watching, you've heard the truth. You can't unhear it. You can't unsee what's been revealed. The question is what you do with it. Some of you will close this video and go back to sleep. You'll convince yourself it's too extreme, too controversial, too uncomfortable, and you'll keep trying to make it work in a system designed for your failure. But some of you won't. Some of you will hear this and feel your grandmother's prayers activating. You'll remember the dreams you had before the system taught you they were impossible. You'll look at your children and decide they will not inherit your chains, and you'll start moving with wisdom, with strategy, but with holy urgency. This video is part of a series. We're exposing hidden biblical truths, suppressed history, prophetic patterns that connect scripture to current events. And if this message opened your eyes, you need to subscribe. You need to be part of this journey. Turn on all notifications, because YouTube doesn't promote content like this. They suppress it. They don't want this information spreading. They don't want you waking up, so you have to actively choose to stay connected. Every video I create is designed to free minds, to equip warriors, to build kingdom infrastructure. This isn't entertainment. This is discipleship. This is preparation for what's coming. Subscribe and become part of the Exodus generation. Now share this. This video needs to reach every person over 55 who's been lied to by the church, by the system, by the mythology. Share it with your parents, your aunts and uncles, your church members who voted against their own interests because they believed the lie. Share it in your group chats, on your Facebook, email it if you have to. Some of you are thinking this is too controversial. Good. Truth is supposed to disrupt comfort. Jesus flipped tables. He called the religious leaders vipers and whitewashed tombs. He didn't come to make people comfortable. He came to set captives free. Don't let this information stop with you. You're a truth bearer now. You have a responsibility to pass this to the next generation. Your grandchildren are going to ask you, what did you do when the empire was falling? What will you tell them? That you knew the truth and stayed silent, or that you spoke up even when it cost you. This isn't just about you. This is about breaking chains for generations not yet born. Every person who watches this and wakes up is one more person building the alternative while Babylon burns. You have a choice right now. Go back to sleep and pretend everything is fine. Or wake up fully and prepare for what's coming. The Israelites at the Red Sea had the same choice. Trust what they could see, the Egyptian army, the water, or trust what God said. I'm telling you, the timer is done. The Exodus is now, and you need to decide today whether you're crossing over or dying in the wilderness. This is your moment. This is your generation's Red Sea. Act like it. Let's pray. Father God,